Welcome to the Plagues Project.
10 plagues, many angles.
Now more than ever.
Come learn with us.
The plague of the boils, the sixth plague of the 10, is the turning point of the entire Torah. The 10 plagues are obviously a key moment because the Israelites have been in slavery in Egypt and they wish to leave. And there's this whole set of travesties that have to take place, it seems, in order for that to happen. Pharaoh isn't going to let them go unless there is abundant evidence that the alternatives to letting them go would be much worse. And so it takes these 10 terrible plagues for that to happen. And at the Passover Seder every year, we mark the tragedy of this moment with, spilling a little portion of our wine onto our plates with our pinkies. And it's an important moment. And I think that for so many of us, it's a nice ritual, but we're saying the 10 plagues, blood, dam, Tzvardea, frogs, go down the list, and you don't really dwell in any one of the plagues. You just sort of get through that part and then, next part of the Seder. But I really want to dive into what is happening in each moment of these plagues, a little bit of a play-by-play. And I apologize for that in one sense, because, it's thinking about bringing these diseases on animals and bringing these tragedies on a people. But when you look at the text of the book of Exodus, I think some really notable things arise about the character of Moses, the character of Aaron, even the character of God, and the character of the Israelites as a nation that we can see when we look at these stories. So, to say it again, the entire Torah hinges on the plague of the boils. Now I got to prove it. Okay, so we're going to back up. We're going to start from the beginning of Exodus. We've got a whole bunch of names. The book of Exodus in Hebrew is Shemot. So we hear all these names of different tribes that make up the people of Israel in Egypt. And what we see then is this interaction at the burning bush. So Moses is terrified. Moses meets God. And what's the first thing that Moses and God schmooze about? They schmooze about how hard it is for Moses to schmooze. They talk about how Moses is heavy of tongue, that he has trouble for whatever set of reasons, we don't know exactly why, with speaking, with public speaking. I want to really, really hold that. I mean, I'm not the first one to notice this. Lots and lots of commentators talk about this piece of Moses that, maybe he has a speech impediment, maybe he's just uncomfortable with speaking. I believe that Moses's fear of being in public and speaking to a large group of people is a core narrative of these 10 plagues. So many people today resonate with the fear that comes with speaking to a group of people. Moses is no different. Okay, so what does God do at that burning bush? Well, Aaron, Moses' brother, is the spokesperson. God says, Moses, don't worry about it. I mean, he doesn't say it this calmly. God's actually very angry at first, but God says, look, you've got this older brother, Aaron. He'll sort of be the spokesperson. You're still going to be my go-to contact, Moses, but Aaron will be along for the ride and speak for you. Okay. So we get some more text. We get up to chapter 4. So we're just journeying through Exodus now. So chapter 4, we're still Aaron-centric in terms of who is the leader to the people. If you're a typical Israelite, I think your experience of the Exodus early on is not through Moses. It's mostly through Aaron, because the text keeps on saying, Moses says to Aaron, and then Aaron does X, Y, or Z to the people, or he performs a wondrous task in front of the people, or he says things to the people. Okay, so this is our rhythm in the first few chapters of Exodus before the plagues. So we're not even at the plagues yet. We're going to get there. But chapter 6 arises. And in chapter 6, Moses tries for the very first time of his life, as far as we see, to talk to the people Israel as a whole. So this is terrifying. I think we can breeze past this. It just says, Moses speaks to the people Israel. It's a sentence that comes up over and over later in the text. But imagine that. You have to speak to the whole people. I mean, I don't know if everybody's gathered there, but at least a big crew. And Moses is somebody who is, as we know, heavy of tongue in some way or another, not so comfortable with speaking. So here's his first ever attempt in chapter 6 of Exodus. And what happens when Moses speaks to the people? Lo shamu. They don't listen. The very first thing that Moses tries to say to the people as a whole, they respond, nah. So now a guy who was already afraid of speaking to large groups has abundant proof that that fear was well-founded. And so he's even more scared, probably. I mean, we don't know this, it doesn't say this, but I am assuming if you have a fear and then you try to take it on and the result is that the people don't listen to you, you're going to retreat into that fear even more. So now what we have is a series of basically one-on-one meetings. The interactions we see of Moses for the next while are either Moses talking to God, sometimes, with Aaron, or Moses talking to Pharaoh. Moses is not comfortable for the next while speaking to the Israelites because look, he just tried it and they literally didn't listen. 0 for 1. So now we're going to break down the plagues because as I said, the entire Torah hinges on the plague of the boils, which is the 6th plague. So we have to see what happens before that and what happens after that and what the turning point is. So let's do it. Plagues 1, 2, and 3. Blood, frogs, and then there's debate about what to translate the third one is, but we're going to call it lice. There's a formula that the text uses in talking about these plagues. It repeats itself. And what it says each time is God speaks to Moses and says to Moses, hey, speak to Aaron. So God knows, it appears, that Moses is terrified of speaking to the crowd, or whether God is anticipating that fear of Moses. For whatever reason, God decides that Moses is not going to speak directly to the people. So God says to Moses, hey, speak to Aaron, and then Aaron will stretch forth Aaron's hand. And so Aaron will, do a task with his body, with his staff, and then a plague will begin. That's the formula for the first 3 plagues. So Moses is not really doing much himself here. God is connecting to Moses, hey, bud, pass this message on to Aaron, and then Aaron does something. Moses is an intermediary. Then we get to the 4th and 5th plagues, which there's some debate about translations here too, but we're going to say flies and cattle disease. So here, God basically does these plagues without any human help. So the first 3 plagues, Aaron had to literally stretch forth his hand or his staff, and then the plagues come. 4th and 5th plague, that's unnecessary. God just does it. And then those 2 plagues, the 4th and 5th, come. And now we have reached our big moment that we've been waiting for. So thus far in the plagues, Moses has been a tiny player from the people's perspective, and maybe even from his own perspective. He's taken a message from God, passed it on, like a game of telephone. Now, something very different happens. So the 6th plague with the boils, there's an interesting amount of detail here where it changes. So we're halfway through the plagues. 5 are done, 5 to go. Moses and Aaron are told by God to take a handful of soot, of dirt together. And then it says that Moses, without Aaron, throws that soot up to heaven, al hashamayma, and then the plague of the boils starts. This is a sentence that only if you're wild and crazy like me would you decide you want to think about deeply, but I am that kind of wild. So I want to think about this. It's a weird series of actions, right? It doesn't make much sense. So you you have this situation where two people are told together to take a handful of dirt up. So like the logistics of that are actually kind of weird. So two people go and they take this handful, and then there's like a handoff, a literal handoff. I'm going to make the argument, as you're probably anticipating, that this is more than just a handoff of dirt. It's a handoff of leadership. It's a real transition where Aaron must let go of that soot because Moses, without Aaron, throws it to heaven, al hashemayma. So there's this Moses and Aaron situation. They pick up the soot. Aaron backs off. Moses throws it up to heaven. And then the plague of the boils begins. Boils arise on all the Egyptians and, nasty stuff. I think that's important. I don't think that this is an accident. There's a formula to those initial plagues. There's a deliberateness in terms of how the process goes, where Moses is positioned in a certain way as an intermediary, and then that changes. Moses, and this is presumably in front of the people, right? So when these plagues are starting, it's not just Moses and Aaron in a side room. Like Moses in front of the people throws the soot up to heaven and a plague begins. So this is a kind of public performance, which is exactly what he's afraid of, and which his well-founded fear before we saw. And he takes it on anyway. Plague 7. Moses is instructed to lift his staff, his rod, toward heaven, al hashemayim, and then the plague of hail starts. So now Moses has taken on another plague where he, without Aaron, sort of executes it. Then number 8, same thing. Moses does the plague of the locusts with his own actions and his own. I mean, God is sort of channeling Moses is the idea, but Moses is the only human actor involved. Then number 9, also just Moses. 6, 7, 8, 9. Ever since that handoff with the soot, Moses is now the leader. It's that moment with the boils. And so now we've got a huge moment that all of us at our Passover Seders, I hope, hold with a variety of different emotional valences. Like for me, we've got the 10th plague. And for me, that moment is certainly not one of joy. In the story, it plays this hard role because it seems to have to happen according to the story's authors in order for the Israelites to leave. But it's a massive number of deaths by a population of Egyptians. And as far as we know, I mean, the text doesn't say, we don't know that individual people who are dying, some of them children, because firstborn, we don't know if they've done anything to merit that. But this happens. And so let's look at what the 10th plague includes. In chapter 12 of Exodus, Moses calls all the elders of Israel together. It's once again not a passage that you would necessarily note when you're reading it. Because, okay, so Moses calls all the elders of Israel together. It's like, and God spoke to Moses saying, and Moses called the community of Israel. There's a million instances of that in the text of Exodus. But this is the second time, not the first, the second time that Moses is speaking to a group of people in the text. Every single other moment, it has been him in one-on-one interactions, either with God or with Pharaoh, or maybe 2-on-1 because Aaron's been involved. Okay, so Moses calls all the elders of Israel. What's going to happen? Are they going to not listen again? Lo shamu? He tells them, put the blood on the doorposts of your house. And they listen. For whatever reason, they listen. Back in chapter 6, only 6 chapters of text ago, but eons in terms of Moses' life experience. I mean, he's brought all these plagues now. In that chapter 6 chapters ago, they didn't listen to Moses. Here in chapter 12, they do. And not only that, it says it twice. When Moses calls all the elders of Israel together and talks to them about the 10th plague, it says, Vayelchu v'ya'asu. It says, they went and they did it. The elders of Israel, in listening to Moses, they went and they did what he said. So Moses has had this massive transformation, and the people has also had a corresponding transformation, where a person who was devastatingly terrified of speaking to large groups of people has grown to a point where he's confident to do that, and they really believe in him. Where at first they didn't believe in him, they weren't ready to listen. Now they seem to be. So then, after this happens, God takes on the plague of the firstborn, and the people leave. Throughout the remainder of the 5 books of Moses, we see him as this central figure that I would argue he really isn't in the text of the first few chapters of Exodus, at least not if you're an Israelite. From their perspective, Moses is a sort of a sidebar figure to Aaron at that point. So it all happens in that 6th plague of the boils. There are so many moments like this in the text of the 10 plagues. When you really look at what are the mechanics? Who's being asked to do what? Who's lifting their staff here? What's going on? Some interesting ideas can come to light. And you can look at a plague like the boils. You can look at something that's about, people's skin becoming nasty. And all of a sudden, it can shine light on things that are much deeper than that, on questions of leadership, of public speaking, of growth over time in a person. And so my hope is that in reflecting on the 10 plagues, even if you don't find yourself resonating fully with this teaching of mine, you can really look at that text in Exodus, that few chapters from 6 through 12, and find something you didn't notice before.